4. Let's talk about the first thing that's happening inside the mind of the avoidant before they ever think of coming back. The battle between independence and longing. 4. You have to understand, for someone wired with an avoidant pattern, intimacy can feel like both oxygen and suffocation at the same time. On one hand, for they crave the warmth, the safety, the consistency that a relationship brings. On the other hand, 4. The very closeness they desire triggers a deep fear of losing themselves. It's not that they don't care. It's not that they don't feel. 4. It's that the part of them built for survival whispers, if I get too close, I'll be trapped, I'll be consumed. And so, they step back. 4. They create distance. They push away, not because the connection isn't real, but because it's too real. 4. But here's the paradox. Distance doesn't silence the longing. The farther they step back, the louder the pull becomes. Alone, in that space they create, the memories start echoing. They remember the way you looked at them with acceptance. They remember the security of your presence. They remember, even if they'd never admit it, the feeling of being seen without having to perform. And that memory gnaws at them, because while independence feels safe, for it doesn't feel whole. You see, the human psyche is wired for both autonomy and connection. We all need freedom, but we also all need love. For avoidance, for those two needs feel like they're at war. They've been conditioned, sometimes from childhood, to believe that if they surrender to closeness, they'll lose themselves, their voice, their power. So independence becomes sacred even if it costs them intimacy. Yet, the truth they can't escape is that independence without love eventually feels empty. It's freedom without fulfillment. So before they come back, there's this invisible struggle raging inside them. They're telling themselves, I don't need anyone. I'm better on my own. I can handle this. But then, late at night or in the quiet moments when the world isn't demanding anything of them, another voice breaks through. But I miss them. I miss what we had. Maybe I pushed away something I actually needed. That's the voice of longing. That's the voice of the human heart that no defense mechanism can fully silence. And here's what's fascinating. Many avoidants mistake longing for weakness. They think, if I miss you, it means I'm losing control. But longing isn't weakness. It's evidence of their humanity. It's proof that no matter how much armor they wear, they are still wired for love. That's why this tug of war matters, because the longer they try to numb that longing, the stronger it becomes. And eventually, the cost of isolation outweighs the cost of closeness. That's the point where you'll often see them circle back, not because they've suddenly erased their fears, but because the desire for connection has grown louder than the need for independence. So when we talk about what avoidants secretly think before they come back, understand this: they are living in a contradiction. They are both terrified of losing themselves in love and terrified of living without it. That's the invisible battle that no one sees, the silent war behind their silence. And if you've ever been on the receiving end of their distance, don't mistake it for lack of care. More often than not, it's the opposite. It's because the bond mattered too much and their nervous system didn't know how to hold it. The ultimate truth is this: the strongest walls they build around themselves are not proof of indifference. They are proof of how deeply they feel, and how unprepared they are to let themselves fully need someone. And the moment the longing outweighs the fear, that's when the walls begin to crack. Because no matter how far they run, love has a way of calling them back. Now let's go deeper into what happens once the avoidant has created distance. On the surface, it looks like they've moved on. They're quiet, detached, maybe even cold. They'll distract themselves with work, with hobbies, with new people. Anything to prove that they don't need the connection they left behind. But what no one sees is the silent reflection happening beneath that exterior. Because while avoidance thrives on suppression, the human mind never truly lets go of what mattered. And before they ever consider coming back, there's always a stage where they revisit what was lost. Think about it, memory is selective. We don't usually remember the daily conflicts, the arguments word for word. What lingers are the emotional imprints, the little moments that cut through the noise. The avoidant may not sit and consciously say, I regret leaving. But when they're alone, fragments begin to surface. The way you made them laugh in the middle of their worst day. The way you understood their silence when words wouldn't come. The way your presence softened the edges of a world that often feels harsh to them. 4. Those details slip into their consciousness when they least expect it, and they start questioning what they walked away from. Here's the truth, for when an avoidant is in the relationship, they're often consumed by the urge to protect themselves. They see closeness as a threat, but after stepping back, 4. That survival instinct begins to quiet down and the emptiness of distance leaves space for clarity. Suddenly, they see the very things they dismissed. They recognize that the stability they once resisted was actually grounding them. They realize that the love they pushed away wasn't a cage, but an anchor. And in that recognition, reflection starts turning into regret. But here's what makes it so complex. Avoidants rarely admit this to anyone, not even to themselves at first. To say, I miss them, feels like surrendering power. To admit, I lost something valuable, threatens their self-image of independence. So instead of acknowledging it outright, they experience it as a quiet restlessness. They'll scroll through old pictures. They'll find themselves driving past familiar places. They'll hear a song and feel a knot in their chest they can't explain. These are not coincidences. These are the subconscious pulling them back to what they tried to bury. Psychologically, this is the cost of repression. You can shut down your feelings, but you can't erase the imprint of being loved. And that's why avoidants reflect so deeply in silence. They replay the dynamic not just to remember you, but to test themselves. Was I right to leave? Did I throw away something that mattered? Was my fear bigger than my truth? That inner interrogation can last weeks, months, even years. And every time they circle back to those questions, the emotional weight grows heavier. This is why, before they come back, avoidants don't just think about you. They wrestle with the realization that they may have sabotaged the one thing they secretly wanted. That's the irony of avoidance. What they flee from in fear is often the very thing they grieve in absence. And so they sit with that conflict, knowing on some level that running gave them space but also cost them intimacy. The most powerful part of this process is what it reveals. Avoidants, in their silence, learn something profound. You cannot truly escape love. You can suppress it, deny it, even run from it, but it follows you. It weaves itself into your memories, into your nervous system, into your sense of self. And that's why reflection becomes unavoidable. Because the truth has a way of chasing you down, even in the spaces you thought were safe from it. So when you ask what they secretly think before they come back, understand this. Beneath the cool exterior, there's a heart replaying the loss. There's a mind wrestling with unanswered questions. And there's a soul that can't help but wonder if the greatest mistake they made was letting go of the very thing they were searching for all along. Because sometimes the loudest realizations come in silence. And in that silence, the avoidant begins to understand not just what they left behind, but what they can no longer deny. Now let's look at the real tipping point, the place where the avoidant's inner world becomes almost unbearable. The clash between the fear of vulnerability and the fear of regret. This is the stage where their silence is no longer just distance, it's a battleground. On one side, the voice of fear says, if you open up, if you let yourself depend on someone, you'll lose control. You'll get hurt, you'll be exposed. On the other side, another voice starts whispering, if you don't open up, if you don't go back, you might lose something that could have changed your life forever. And the longer they wrestle with these two forces, the more pressure builds inside of them. The avoidant, vulnerability feels like stepping off a cliff with no safety net. It's not just uncomfortable, it's terrifying. Think about why. Most avoidants grew up in environments where needing someone felt dangerous, where love was inconsistent, conditional, or overwhelming. So they built their identity around self-sufficiency. To lean on someone feels like weakness, like surrender. And yet, as they reflect on what was lost, that fear of regret begins to rise like a shadow that won't go away. They begin to imagine a future without you in it. They begin to see what it would mean to live with the echo of what if for the rest of their lives. This is where psychology meets philosophy. Human beings are not just afraid of pain, we're afraid of meaninglessness. We're afraid of living a life where we never risked enough to love fully, where we let fear dictate our choices. For the avoidant, this realization can be brutal. They start to ask themselves, if I keep running, if I keep hiding, what will I have left in the end? And in that questioning, regret begins to outweigh fear. You can see it in their behaviors. They might not reach out directly, but they hover around the edges. They like your posts, they check your stories. They ask mutual friends about you. These are small signals of a bigger storm. They're testing the waters not because they don't care, because they're fighting with themselves. 4. Vulnerability feels like death, but regret feels like a slower death they can't live with. And this is the turning point. For every avoidant reaches a moment where they realize that not all pain is equal. The pain of vulnerability stings, but it passes. It leads to growth. For the pain of regret, however, lingers. It becomes a permanent scar, a story they carry forever. And before they come back, this is the very equation they wrestle with. For which pain am I willing to live with? The temporary fear of opening my heart, or the permanent regret of knowing I ran from it? 4. What's profound here is that this inner conflict is not just about relationships. It's about life itself. Every one of us has to choose at some point. 4. Will I live protected, or will I live fulfilled? The avoidance journey is simply a more magnified version of the same question we all face. 4. And when they finally come back, it's not because they've conquered all their fears. 4. It's because they've finally understood that the cost of running is greater than the risk of staying. So remember this when you think they're cold. 4. When you think they've forgotten, know that beneath that surface is a battle most people never see. It's the fight between fear and regret. 4. And at the end of the day, regret is the one enemy none of us can outrun. Because vulnerability may break you for a moment, but regret will break you for a lifetime. 4. And then we arrive at the final stage, the secret hope that lies beneath all the fear, all the reflection. 4. All the inner conflict, the hope for a different beginning. See, before an avoidant comes back, they're not simply thinking about returning to what was. In fact, that thought terrifies them. What they want deep down is a reset, a chance to start again without the weight of past mistakes. 4. Without the fear that closeness will suffocate them, without the patterns that drove them away in the first place. 4. They dream of coming back to a version of the relationship where they can breathe, where intimacy and independence don't feel like enemies but allies. 4. This is something most people don't realize. Avoidants don't actually want to live in permanent isolation. They want connection just as much as anyone else. 4. What they're afraid of is repeating the same cycle. So before they return, they quietly test this possibility in their mind. They ask themselves, if I went back, could it be different? Could I show up in a way I never allowed myself to before? Could I actually hold on to my freedom and still be loved? That's the fantasy. Not just to come back, but to come back transformed, to rewrite the script. This vision becomes powerful because it carries both fear and desire. They fear they can't change, but they also long to believe that change is possible. They picture conversations where they're more open, or where instead of shutting down, they say, I need space right now, but I still care. They imagine moments where instead of withdrawing, 4, they lean in just a little more. These are small shifts, but for the avoidant, they represent an entirely new reality. It's the dream of love without loss of self. Now, let's look at the psychology here. Human beings are wired for stories. We don't just live experiences, we replay them, we reframe them. 4. And we imagine better versions of them. That's what hope really is. For the avoidant, this process of reimagining is what makes the thought of coming back possible. They're not running toward the old relationship, they're reaching for the possibility of a new one. And that distinction is everything. But here's the paradox. 4, they rarely admit this openly. They'll never say, I'm coming back because I want a different beginning. Instead, they'll test the waters subtly. They'll show up in small ways. They'll start a casual conversation, pretending it's nothing, when in reality it's everything. 4. They're not just checking if you're available, they're checking if the dream of that reset is alive. And if they sense that it is, 4, that's when the walls finally start to lower. This is why patience and perspective matter so much in these dynamics. Because what looks like hesitation is often quiet hope. What looks like distance is actually preparation. And what looks like indifference is really the testing of a fragile belief. Maybe it doesn't have to be the same this time. 4. Maybe love can feel safe. So when avoidants secretly think before they come back, they're not just remembering you. They're not just battling their fears. 4. They're holding on to an image of something better, something freer, something more balanced. 4. It's not about returning to the past. It's about creating a future where they can finally reconcile the contradiction inside them. 4. Where freedom and closeness don't cancel each other out, but coexist. And that's the final truth I want to leave you with. Avoidants don't just come back for you. They come back for the chance to become who they couldn't be before. They come back not to repeat history, but to rewrite it, because deep down, every avoidant carries the same hope we all do. That love, when faced with honesty and courage, can give us not just another chance, but a different ending.